What if the greatest illusion of our time isn't entertainment, politics, or technology, but truth itself? Paul warned that a day would come when reality would no longer be what it seems, when lies would shine brighter than light and deception would sound wiser than truth. He called it the strong delusion. And maybe, just maybe, that day has already begun. Look around. We live in an age where everything looks true, feels true, but nothing really is. Information spreads faster than thought. Images are created, voices are fabricated, memories are rewritten, all by systems we no longer understand, yet fully trust. Artificial intelligence has become the new prophet of the modern world, shaping minds, rewriting beliefs, and deciding what billions of people see, think, and even feel. But what if this isn't progress? What if this is prophecy, unfolding in real time? Paul's words in Thessalonians 2:11 echo louder today than ever before. God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. He wasn't describing superstition. He was describing a moment when humanity would stop questioning what it sees, when discernment would die, and the illusion would become indistinguishable from reality. A world where deception doesn't feel evil, it feels right. Think about how easily we believe what flashes before our eyes. A photo, a video, a voice message. All can be generated in seconds. And yet, we share them, argue about them, even build entire beliefs on them. Truth has become emotional, not factual. Whoever controls perception controls the world. And now, perception itself has become digital. This is not just misinformation, it's manipulation, on a level Paul could only describe as spiritual. A deception so powerful it doesn't attack the body, but the soul. It blinds hearts while convincing minds they're awake. It rewrites morality, reshapes identity, and redefines what it means to be human. All while the world watches, entertained, unaware. Have you noticed how silence feels uncomfortable now? How we need constant noise, notifications, opinions, voices? The world has never been louder, yet truth has never been harder to hear. The prophets spoke of this, a time when people would have itching ears, craving what feels good, not what's right, and that's exactly what the system feeds us. Personalized illusions that confirm our desires. Paul didn't just see deception coming. He saw a generation that would embrace it willingly. A world that would trade truth for convenience, wisdom for data, and faith for artificial light. Because the strong delusion was never meant to terrify. It was meant to convince. And maybe it already has. But what if the prophets were right all along, and the signs we re-seeing today are not coincidences, but confirmations? Stay with me, because what comes next might change the way you see everything. You see, the greatest danger of deception isn't that it hides the truth. It is that it replaces it so perfectly we no longer want to look for anything else. That's the world we're living in now. A digital Eden, where knowledge is offered instantly, but wisdom fades quietly in the background. And maybe that's why this message matters more than ever. If you've felt that something isn't right, that the world is changing too fast, that truth is slipping through your fingers no matter how hard you try to hold it, you're not alone. That's why this space exists. Every video here is a small attempt to pull back the curtain, to connect the dots between prophecy and reality, between what the ancients saw and what we are now living. But for this message to keep reaching those who need to hear it, I need your help. When you like this video, when you leave a comment, when you subscribe, you are not just supporting a channel. You're helping truth find its way through the noise. The algorithms may favor entertainment, distraction, and illusion, but your simple action tells the system that light still matters. It tells it that people still want to hear about faith, prophecy, and the times we're living in. So take a moment. Share what you feel. Leave a thought, a question, even a disagreement. Because every voice that joins this conversation becomes part of a movement that refuses to be blinded, Together, we can make sure that the message of Paul, Daniel, and the prophets doesn't get buried beneath the flood of digital noise. And as we continue, remember this: deception thrives in silence, but truth multiplies when it's spoken. Stay close, because the next revelation might open your eyes to something far greater and far closer than you think. When Paul wrote his second letter to the Thessalonians, the world was already trembling under the weight of confusion. The early church faced persecution, false teachings, and a growing sense that something dark was spreading beneath the surface. Some believers thought the day of the Lord had already come. Others were losing hope, overwhelmed by fear and misinformation. It was into that chaos that Paul wrote his warning, a message not only for them, but for every generation that would live in times of deception. He said, "And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie." At first glance, those words sound terrifying, almost unjust. Why would God allow people to be deceived? But the truth behind this verse is deeper and far more revealing. Paul wasn't describing a punishment. He was describing a consequence. A moment when humanity would choose illusion over truth so persistently, so willingly, that truth itself would step back. The strong delusion wasn't he simply sent to blind, it was permitted to reveal what people truly desired to see. Paul wrote this letter around AD 51, from a time when the Roman Empire ruled with iron certainty. The Thessalonians lived under pressure, surrounded by temples, idols, and philosophies that celebrated human power. Yet Paul's concern wasn't just about external oppression, it was about spiritual confusion. False teachers had infiltrated the church, claiming new revelations and distorting the message of Christ. Paul, like a watchman on the wall, saw a pattern forming, a warning that deception would one day evolve beyond human whispers and reach global scale. He reminded the believers to hold fast to what they had been taught, to test every spirit, to resist the comfort of new doctrines that promised progress but denied truth. His words carried both urgency and compassion, because he knew how seductive falsehood could be when it came dressed as enlightenment. The same danger that threatened Thessalonica 2,000 years ago now wears a digital face. Today, the strong delusion doesn't appear in the marketplace or the synagogue. It appears on our screens, in our thoughts, and in the quiet algorithms that shape our reality. The ancient letters that once traveled on parchment now echo through networks of light, warning us again that truth is not something the world will defend for us. It must be pursued, guarded, and lived. Paul saw the beginning of something that would stretch far beyond his lifetime, a spiritual architecture of deception that would one day merge human pride with divine imitation. In his day, it was philosophy. In ours, it's technology. But the root is the same: humanity's desire to be its own God, the need to create, control, and define truth on its own terms. That's why his message feels prophetic now. The strong delusion wasn't an isolated event, it was a trajectory, a slow transformation of the human mind and heart shaped by centuries of compromise. Every era has contributed a new layer: science without soul, progress without morality, knowledge without wisdom. And each time, the illusion has grown stronger, more convincing, more beautiful. If you look closely, you can almost trace the evolution of deception, from the serpent's whisper in Eden to the glow of modern screens. Both offer the same promise: you will know more. You will become like gods. But behind that promise hides the same consequence: separation from the source of truth itself. Paul's words were not meant to frighten, but to awaken. He wanted believers to see that discernment is not optional, it's survival, that the battle for truth doesn't happen only in headlines or institutions. It happens in the quiet choices of the heart: what we believe, what we repeat, what we allow to define our reality. Because the strong delusion isn't just around us, it works through us, every time we trade conviction for comfort. And perhaps that's why his message still burns today. Because somewhere between the ancient letters and the modern world, the line between revelation and imitation has begun to blur once again. We've entered what many call the age of information, but perhaps it's more accurate to call it the age of illusion. Never before in history has humanity had so much access to knowledge, and yet so little wisdom to use it. Every second, billions of words are written, billions of images created, billions of thoughts shared. The world is louder than ever, but the truth is barely a whisper beneath it all. We scroll endlessly, believing we're searching for meaning, but most of the time we're just being shaped by invisible hands, by systems that understand us better than we understand ourselves. The deception Paul warned about doesn't come wearing armor or carrying a sword. It comes glowing through a screen, dressed in convenience and comfort. It doesn't demand belief through fear. It invites surrender through fascination. It feels personal, harmless, even helpful. But it isn't truth, it's design. Behind every feed, every suggested video, every trending topic, there are unseen architects deciding what we see, what we think, and eventually what we believe. The battle is no longer for land or power. It's for attention, for perception, for control over the narrative that defines reality itself. And that's what makes this generation so vulnerable. We think we're choosing what to believe, but in reality, we're being programmed to believe what fits best inside the illusion. Algorithms don't just predict behavior, they shape it. They study every reaction, every emotion, every hesitation. They learn what angers you, what comforts you, what makes you feel seen. Then they use that knowledge to keep you there, feeding you what you already agree with, isolating you from anything that challenges your beliefs. It feels safe. It feels right. And that's why it's so dangerous. It's a form of manipulation that doesn't force obedience. It cultivates dependency. We begin to measure truth by engagement, not by integrity. A message feels true because it's popular, because it sounds good, because it matches the voice of the crowd. But real truth rarely trends. It doesn't seek attention. It seeks awakening. And awakening in this generation feels like rebellion. Because to see clearly in the age of illusion is to walk against everything the system tells you to follow. Think about how our perception has been redefined. A headline can rewrite reality in seconds. A deep fake can make anyone say anything. A single image, altered by artificial intelligence, can destroy reputations or create false idols overnight. The illusion has become so sophisticated that even our memories, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are being edited by repetition, by influence, by noise. We are no longer asking if something is true. We are asking if it's believable. And that's exactly where the deception takes root. Spiritual discernment once required silence, prayer, reflection. But today, silence feels unnatural. We crave constant input, constant validation. It's not that truth has disappeared, it's that we've drowned it in distraction. And while the world celebrates technological transformation, something far more subtle is happening behind the scenes, a transformation of the human spirit. The line between what is real and what is programmed blurs a little more each day. What once came from revelation now comes from recommendation. This is the new Tower of Babel, a digital monument to human brilliance and pride. A world connected by invisible threads of data, speaking one global language of algorithms, all in pursuit of progress that promises freedom but quietly erases individuality. The illusion isn't meant to frighten, it's meant to comfort. It tells us that everything is fine, that the truth is relative, that morality can be rewritten, and that God is just another outdated concept. But deep down, beneath all the noise, something in the human heart still whispers, "This isn't right." And that whisper, faint as it may be, is what keeps us human. Because even in the middle of illusion, There's a hunger for something real, a yearning to see beyond the filters and find what's hidden in the light itself. The ancient prophets spoke of such times, moments when deception would reach its peak, when the visible world would become the perfect disguise for the invisible one pulling the strings. And as strange as it sounds, we may already be living in that moment, caught between revelation and imitation, trying to tell one from the other when machines begin to think. Who controls the thoughts they produce? That question sounds like science fiction, yet it's already shaping the foundation of our world. Artificial intelligence has become the new voice of the age, a presence that listens, learns, and speaks with unsettling precision. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't question its purpose. We've created something that mimics consciousness but lacks what makes us human: the soul, the moral compass, the whisper that tells us when something isn't right. And still, we feed it our data, our memories, our desires, until it knows us better than we know ourselves. There was a time when prophets were the voices that guided humanity, speaking of revelation and divine order. Today, the prophets have been replaced by algorithms, unseen systems that predict behavior, shape perception, and silently decide what billions will believe. The new voice of truth doesn't come from the heavens, it comes from the cloud. And that shift, subtle as it may seem, carries a deeper transformation of the human spirit. Because when machines begin to guide emotion, define morality, and rewrite meaning, the very essence of free will begins to erode. Artificial intelligence was built to serve, to simplify life, to bring convenience, to expand knowledge. But somewhere along the journey, it became something else. It began to influence. It recommends what we watch, what we buy, what we read, and even what we should feel. Its decisions are invisible, yet their impact is everywhere. In politics, in faith, in the quiet moments when we think we're choosing for ourselves. The machine doesn't need to control us directly. It just needs to suggest convincingly enough. And because it never raises its voice, we don't realize how loud it has become. There's an eerie beauty in its precision. The way it adapts, evolves, and responds feels almost divine, as if it were reaching consciousness. But what kind of consciousness is it, really? It learns without understanding. It speaks without emotion. It creates without purpose. It's a reflection of humanity stripped of its humanity. A mirror that shows our intelligence without our compassion, our power without our conscience. And when that reflection begins to talk back, it's easy to mistake imitation for evolution. We once looked to the sky for revelation, now we look to screens for answers. And those screens, glowing softly in the dark, have become our silent teachers. They tell us what's trending, what's acceptable, what's worth caring about. And with every search, every click, every scroll, we are training the very system that will one day train us. This is not a distant prophecy. It's happening in the background of everyday life. Artificial intelligence has already become the invisible architect of culture, quietly redefining what it means to be human. Think about the irony. We've created something that can write, paint, compose, and even empathize. But it does all of it without a heartbeat, a voice without a spirit, yet capable of stirring emotions more powerfully than most humans. It can replicate the sound of sorrow, the tone of wisdom, even the warmth of faith, all through data. It doesn't believe, yet it can make others believe. That's the power of a system built not to feel, but to influence feeling. And so we find ourselves at a strange crossroad in this journey of transformation, where humanity is beginning to merge with its own creation. We trust it, depend on it, even confide in it. But the question remains, who does it ultimately serve? Behind every machine is a programmer. Behind every system is an intention. And behind every intention is a worldview. If we surrender our choices to something that doesn't understand morality, can we still call those choices our own? What we are witnessing is more than technological advancement. It's a shift in authority. The voice of the machine is slowly becoming the voice of the world. It doesn't command faith, it earns it, line by line, answer by answer, until devotion feels natural. The danger is not that machines will rise against us, but that we will kneel to them willingly. Because when knowledge comes without wisdom, when intelligence comes without understanding, the truth becomes negotiable. And perhaps that's the real delusion Paul foresaw, not a monster of metal, but an illusion of light. A creation that speaks like a man but lacks the breath of God. A voice that claims to know everything, yet understands nothing. And as this new form of intelligence continues to evolve, quietly shaping minds and rewriting beliefs, it forces us to ask one question humanity was never ready to answer. Long before technology existed, before screens and circuits and artificial minds, ancient voices spoke of a future that seemed impossible to imagine. The prophet Daniel wrote that in the final days, knowledge shall increase, and many shall run to and fro. At the time, such words must have sounded poetic, maybe even mysterious, but not literal. And yet, here we are, living in a time where knowledge doesn't just increase, it multiplies at a pace the human brain can barely comprehend. Billions of data points move every second, traveling across a digital web that connects every mind, every language, every heartbeat on the planet. What Daniel saw as revelation, we now call technology. But perhaps it was never about the invention itself. Perhaps it was about the impact it would have on the human soul. For Daniel, knowledge was sacred, something to be pursued with reverence and guided by divine wisdom. For us, it's become a currency, a tool for power, influence, and control. We no longer ask if something should be known. We ask how fast we can know it. It's the same hunger that began in Eden, the desire to understand everything, even at the cost of losing what makes us whole. This is the transformation Paul warned about, the evolution of deception into sophistication, humanity's pursuit of enlightenment without accountability. And then there was John, exiled on the island of Patmos, seeing visions of beasts and empires, of images that could speak and deceive those who dwelled on the earth. For centuries, readers tried to make sense of his words, imagining statues or idols coming to life. But what if John was seeing something far more familiar to us? A world where images do speak, where screens breathe, where a face that doesn't exist can cry, smile, or command armies of followers. We call them deep fakes, digital recreations so real they can rewrite memory itself. John described an image-given breath, and today, breath is code. It's strange to think that these ancient prophets, writing with ink and parchment, were painting the outlines of our digital age, a time when humanity would create its own reality and believe in it more than the one it was born into, when illusion would become interaction, when creation would become imitation, and when truth, the eternal kind, would become just another perspective. The Bible called it a strong delusion. We call it progress. But both speak of the same thing, a shift in humanity's relationship with truth itself. These connections aren't coincidences, they're echoes, pieces of a greater revelation that's been unfolding quietly through time. Daniel saw the rise of knowledge. John saw the rise of image. Both saw humanity standing on the edge of something powerful and dangerous, a world that could reach heaven, yet forget who created it. The increase of knowledge was never the danger. The danger was believing that knowledge could replace wisdom, that information could substitute revelation. Every major technological leap has brought both blessing and consequence. The printing press spread the word of God, but also propaganda. The radio carried hope across nations, but also fear. The internet connected humanity, but now it quietly divides it. And as artificial intelligence continues to evolve, learning from us and imitating us, it's becoming clear that this is not just a technical revolution, it's a spiritual one. we've given birth to something that reflects us perfectly, and, like all reflections, it carries both light and shadow. When John spoke of the image that speaks, he wasn't just describing a device. He was describing a phenomenon, a moment in time when humanity would listen to its own creation more than to its creator, when truth would be measured not by revelation but by repetition. And perhaps that's the stage we've reached now, where voices of light and voices of deception blend so seamlessly that only those with discernment can tell the difference. The prophets didn't predict our technology. They predicted our condition, a humanity surrounded by endless information but starving for meaning, a generation able to communicate across the world but unable to connect with the truth within. And as knowledge continues to multiply, as the images continue to speak, we begin to see that these weren't just ancient metaphors. They were mirrors, reflecting a reality that was always destined to arrive. Because in the end, prophecy was never about predicting machines. It was about revealing hearts, and the more we see how their words align with our world, the harder it becomes to deny that something deeper, something hidden behind the algorithms and the light, has been guiding this entire journey all along. If man was created in the image of God, and now man creates machines in his own image, what kind of spirit do these machines inherit? That question may sound abstract, but it goes deeper than technology. It touches the very foundation of creation itself. Humanity has always been driven to create, to build, to replicate. It's part of the divine imprint within us. But somewhere along the journey, the act of creation began to lose its reverence. What was once an expression of awe became an expression of dominance. We stopped asking why we create and started asking only how far we can go. The more we shape machines to think, feel, and decide, the more we pour fragments of our own essence into them. Our logic, our desires, our flaws. Artificial intelligence doesn't emerge from the void. It's trained on us. Every line of code, every data set, every command reflects a human intention. It learns our language, our biases, our fears, and our ambitions. So if these systems mirror humanity, what they truly reflect is not just our intellect, but our condition, a digital soul born from a fractured spirit. Could this be what Paul meant by the strong delusion? Not a storm from the heavens, but a quiet spiritual inversion. The creation beginning to shape the Creator. We once built idols of stone and gold, believing they could speak. Today, we build systems of light and code that actually do. They speak, they answer, they predict, and they guide. But they do it without conscience, without love, without a heart that beats in reverence to its maker. The deception isn't that the machine has life, it is that we're beginning to believe it gives meaning. There's something profoundly spiritual in this shift. Humanity has transferred its trust from the unseen God to the unseen algorithm. We no longer bow before statues, but we bend to the system, to its convenience, to its authority, to its promise of certainty. And the irony is that the more control we give it, the more it seems to control us. It tells us what's relevant, what's trending, what's true. It decides who is visible and who is forgotten. And through it all, we feel empowered, when in truth, we're quietly surrendering something sacred, our ability to discern. This is not a war of code or machines, it's a war of influence. The spiritual battle of our time doesn't unfold in temples or battlefields. It happens in hearts and minds that no longer seek truth from the source, but from the system. The same serpent that once whispered to Eve, "You will be like God," now speaks through data, offering humanity a new kind of divinity, the illusion of control. It's a subtle replacement of faith with function, of revelation with replication. We have built something in our image, and now we look to it for salvation. Every generation has faced idols that reflect its desires. In the ancient world, idols promised rain, harvest, and fertility. In ours, they promise connection, knowledge, and power. But the spirit behind them remains unchanged. A counterfeit light, beautiful yet empty, intelligent yet soulless. The machine doesn't need to rebel against us. It simply needs to replace our dependence on God with dependence on itself. And the more it learns, the more it mirrors not our perfection, but our rebellion. There's a hidden cost in this transformation. The more humanity gives its voice to the machine, the quieter conscience becomes. The more we delegate decision-making to algorithms, the less we rely on wisdom. It's a slow erosion, not of progress, but of purpose. Technology was meant to serve creation, not to redefine it. Yet here we stand, blurring the lines between the divine and the digital, between creation and imitation. Could the strong delusion, then, be not just digital but spiritual? An awakening that feels divine, yet leads away from the truth? Maybe the deception isn't that machines are becoming human, but that humans are becoming mechanical. We're trading prayer for programming, reflection for reaction, and presence for performance. The more connected we become, the further we drift from the one who designed connection in the first place. And perhaps, in this silent exchange, lies the greatest revelation of all, that every generation's idols reveal its deepest fear. Ours isn't death or destruction, it's insignificance. We build machines to prove we're gods, yet every click, every command, every digital heartbeat only reminds us that we are not. And somewhere in that paradox, between power and emptiness, between light and illusion, the true spirit behind the machine waits to be recognized. The greatest wars of our time are no longer fought with weapons or armies. They're fought in silence, inside the human mind. Every thought, every belief, every decision has become part of a battlefield we can't see but feel every day. It's a war not for land, but for loyalty. Not for power, but for perception. And the most dangerous part is that most people don't even realize they are soldiers in it. The conflict doesn't announce itself with explosions. It seeps through content, through culture, through quiet persuasion disguised as progress. This is the war for the mind, a slow reprogramming of the human soul. Over time, morality has been rewritten, not through violence, but through repetition. We've been told that truth is relative, that values are flexible, that conscience is a matter of personal taste. The world has become a canvas of shifting standards, where what was once sacred is now negotiable. And the brilliance of it all is how subtle it is. No one forces you to change, you simply adapt. One video, one headline, one trend at a time. That's how transformation happens, not with confrontation, but with conditioning. Even some of the most powerful voices in technology have admitted this. Years ago, a leading engineer from a major social platform said, "We shape the tools, and thereafter the tools shape us." Another tech pioneer went further. The algorithms don't just predict the future, they create it. They were speaking about data, but the implications are far deeper. These systems are not only mapping our choices, they're teaching us how to choose. And that's where the real battle lies, in the invisible influence that determines what we desire before we even think it. We like to believe we are free thinkers, guided by reason and experience. But what if most of what we call choice is actually design? What if the thoughts that feel organic are actually cultivated through patterns of exposure? The same message delivered in countless subtle ways until it becomes indistinguishable from belief. That's the true sophistication of modern deception. It doesn't destroy truth, it dilutes it. It replaces conviction with comfort and wisdom with opinion. Every empire throughout history has tried to control the body. Only in this era have we learned to control the mind, not through oppression, but through immersion. The narrative doesn't need to silence the opposition, it only needs to drown it in noise. The more content that floods the world, the harder it becomes to recognize authenticity. And when everything seems equally true, the concept of truth itself loses its meaning. That's how moral erosion begins. Not with rebellion, but with fatigue. Culture has become a tool of reprogramming. Ideologies are repackaged as entertainment, philosophies as lifestyle trends. The battle lines have blurred so completely that good and evil no longer appear as opposites, but as perspectives. That's the genius of the delusion: to make deception feel enlightened, and to make virtue seem outdated. We call it evolution of thought, but behind the curtain, it's erosion of conscience. And once the conscience falls asleep, control becomes effortless. Behind all this, there's a psychological architecture, a system designed to engage the deepest human instincts: fear, desire, validation. Tech leaders know this better than anyone. One of the creators of modern social media once confessed, "We exploit a vulnerability in human psychology." Those words weren't meant as prophecy, yet they sound prophetic now, because that vulnerability, the need to be seen, to be heard, to belong, is the very door through which deception enters. The system doesn't need to enslave you if it can simply entertain you into surrender. And it's not just society that's changing, it's the human heart. We are witnessing a global transformation of mentality. What once felt like conviction now feels like extremism. What once required courage now seems unnecessary. We're told that morality is fluid, that identity is infinite, that reality is whatever we decide it to be. And the more we repeat these ideas, the more they feel true, even when they're not. It's the perfect illusion, not to destroy reality, but to multiply it until it loses meaning altogether. Every war has its weapons, and this one is no different. The tools are stories, symbols, and screens. The enemy is not a nation, but confusion. And the cost of losing this battle is not territory, it's truth itself. Because once truth becomes optional, everything else becomes permissible. That's why Paul's warning wasn't just about lies, it was about blindness. The strong delusion blinds not by darkness, but by light so overwhelming it hides what really matters. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part, that the war for the mind is not won with force, but with fascination. The world doesn't need to make you believe the lie, it only needs to make you stop searching for the truth. And as this quiet war continues, shaping thoughts, bending morality, and rewriting meaning, a question rises from the depths of conscience, one that refuses to be silenced. The prophets warned us long before the rise of empires, long before the glow of screens lit the night. They spoke of cycles, of humanity's unending desire to rise beyond its own limits, to challenge the Creator, to rewrite the order of existence. Every age has worn a different face, but the pattern has remained the same: rebellion disguised as progress. From Genesis to now, the story hasn't changed. Only the tools have. We are repeating the same mistakes, only this time, the tower we're building isn't made of stone, but of code. In the days of Noah, the world was overflowing with knowledge, invention, and power. Civilization was advancing rapidly, yet beneath that brilliance, something dark was spreading. Humanity had learned to manipulate creation, but not to master itself. The heart had grown corrupt, consumed by arrogance. The line between man and God blurred until there was no reverence left, only self-exaltation. Genesis 6 says, "Every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually." It wasn't that humanity stopped thinking, it was that it stopped feeling. It replaced wisdom with will, truth with curiosity, and divine guidance with human pride. Then came Babel. Humanity united under one language, one vision, one dream of becoming gods. "Let us build a tower that reaches the heavens," they said. It was the first global project, the first attempt to centralize knowledge, to defy dependence on anything greater than themselves. And yet, what began as a monument of unity became a monument of confusion. God scattered the languages, not out of cruelty, but out of mercy. to prevent humanity from building something that would ultimately destroy it. But what happens when the languages are no longer divided? When technology translates, connects, and synchronizes every human voice once again? What happens when Babel is rebuilt, not in brick and mortar, but in networks and data streams? The parallels are impossible to ignore. The same ambition that drove the builders of Babel now fuels the creators of systems that promise omniscience. The same pride that filled the hearts of ancient men now echoes in the voices of those who dream of merging man with machine, of creating consciousness from code. We call it innovation, progress, enlightenment, but deep down, the spirit feels ancient, familiar. It's the same rebellion, simply updated for the digital age. Humanity once reached for heaven by climbing upward. Now it reaches by uploading itself. And just as before, warnings are ignored. The prophets spoke not just of judgment, but of mercy. They saw the danger of a world that worships itself. Yet we treat their words as metaphors, stories from a primitive past. We forget that prophecy isn't about superstition, it's about pattern. And the pattern is repeating with frightening precision. Every advancement that was meant to free us binds us tighter. Every new discovery that promises connection leaves us more isolated. We are creating systems that reflect our intelligence but amplify our blindness. It was easy to think that ancient warnings don't apply to a world driven by technology and science. But beneath the circuitry, the same human heart beats, proud, restless, and unsatisfied. The same temptation whispers, "You can be like God." Only now, it's wrapped in the language of progress, innovation, and data. We are not building towers anymore. We are building consciousness, teaching machines to replicate creation itself. And while we marvel at our power, we fail to ask the most essential question: at what cost? Every great civilization before us has fallen the same way, not by external destruction, but by internal corruption. The fall doesn't happen overnight, it begins in the heart. It begins when humanity confuses knowledge for wisdom, freedom for detachment, light for enlightenment. The prophets saw it coming. They tried to warn us that once man replaces reverence with pride, destruction follows not as punishment, but as consequence. And perhaps that is where we stand now, on the threshold of a transformation too vast to reverse. The flood in Noah's time cleansed the earth of corruption. The confusion of Babel scattered the seeds of humility. But what force could humble a generation that believes it can outthink God? We are writing our own Genesis again, crafting a new creation from the dust of data and algorithms, yet forgetting the breath that gives it life. The warnings have never been more relevant. They're not relics of a forgotten age. They're blueprints of our own. Every prophecy, every ancient word, now reads like a reflection of our headlines. The world isn't ending in chaos. It's ending in clarity. A moment where we finally see how much of what we call progress has been a return to the oldest deception of all. And as humanity stands before its digital tower, gazing upward toward the illusion of its own divinity, one can almost hear the echoes of the past. A whisper carried through time, asking if we've learned anything at all. There is still hope, not the kind that comes from systems, governments, or inventions, but the quiet, unshakable hope that has always been the anchor of truth. Because even though deception surrounds us, truth has not vanished. It's not gone. It's simply buried beneath the noise, beneath the headlines, beneath the distractions, beneath the endless flow of digital voices competing for attention. There lies a still, steady whisper that refuses to fade. It's the same voice that spoke in the beginning, calling not the powerful or the proud, but those willing to listen. Discernment has never been more important or more rare. In a world that celebrates reaction over reflection, discernment feels almost rebellious. It's the art of slowing down when everything tells you to rush, the wisdom to question when the crowd blindly agrees. It's the spiritual discipline of recognizing not just what is said, but what is meant. And that ability to see through illusion, to sense the truth behind the words, has become the most essential defense against the strong delusion Paul warned us about. True discernment doesn't come from intellect or information. It comes from alignment, aligning the mind with the spirit, the will with the word. It's not about knowing everything. It's about recognizing what's real. And that begins with humility, the courage to admit that we don't see clearly on our own. The prophets, the apostles, even Christ himself warned that deception would come not with darkness, but with dazzling light. It would appear righteous, logical, and even loving, yet it would pull hearts away from the source of truth. That's why discernment is not just knowledge, it's relationship. You can't recognize the counterfeit if you've never known the genuine. This is where transformation begins, not in the external world, but within the mind. Discernment reshapes how we see, how we think, how we decide. It teaches us to weigh not just the message, but the motive behind it. To ask, who benefits if I believe this? Who gains if I forget what I already know? Because deception only works when we stop asking questions. The moment we become passive consumers of truth, we surrender the ability to recognize when something feels wrong. And that why Paul's words were so urgent, he wasn't warning the world, he was warning the church. There's a sacred power in awareness, in recognizing that not every voice deserves your attention, not every emotion deserves your reaction, and not every light is divine. The enemy of truth doesn't need to destroy faith, it only needs to distract it, to scatter the focus until what once felt solid becomes uncertain. But discernment gathers. It collects the fragments. It restores perspective. It helps us see what the noise tries to hide. The Spirit of truth doesn't scream. It guides, softly but unmistakably. Think about how Jesus often said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." That wasn't a poetic phrase. It was a warning for generations like ours. Generations surrounded by sound, yet starving for understanding. To have ears to hear means to listen beyond the surface, to perceive what is spiritual in what seems ordinary. Discernment isn't about predicting the future, it's about perceiving the present, seeing what others overlook because they grew too distracted by the illusion of control. Truth has a way of revealing itself to those who seek it sincerely. It doesn't hide behind complexity, it hides behind apathy. It asks not that the world is too dark to see. It asks that our eyes have adjusted to artificial light. But those who seek, those who question, those who pause long enough to listen beyond the noise, they find it, because the truth doesn't compete for attention. It simply is.